The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet streets of Crestwood, Virginia, as Maya Thompson guided her black SUV through the town she hadn't seen in 7 years. At 38, Maya carried the steady confidence of someone who'd faced death and won. Shoulders square, eyes scanning every detail, hands positioned precisely at 10 and 2 on the wheel. Today, though, she wasn't a warrior in a war zone. She was just a daughter returning to visit her mother after a grueling overseas mission. Crestwood looked much the same. The red brick courthouse with its white columns, the small police station across from the park, the community center where Maya had learned to paint as a kid. But beneath the surface, divisions lingered. New shops thrived in the East End, while the West Side, her childhood neighborhood, struggled with cracked sidewalks and faded homes. She noticed a patrol car trailing her from the second intersection, its lights off, but its presence deliberate. She wasn't surprised. She'd felt those suspicious stares before in this town. When the patrol car's lights finally flashed, Maya signaled and pulled over smoothly. She'd stopped fully at the last sign, counting 3 seconds as always, but she knew the real reason wasn't traffic law. Her license and registration were already on the passenger seat. She lowered her window, glancing at the side mirror as a tall white officer approached. His badge read, James Carter. "Afternoon," Maya said, her voice calm and polite. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" Carter leaned in, his eyes sweeping the car's interior like he was hunting for something. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," he said flatly. "And I smell something off in this vehicle. License and registration." Maya handed over her documents, knowing she'd stopped correctly. "I came to a full stop, officer," she said evenly. "There's nothing illegal in my car." Her tone was steady, but her eyes cataloged everything. Carter's slight lean toward his holster, his quick glance for witnesses, the body camera blinking on his chest. "Step out of the vehicle," Carter ordered, his hand resting on his gun. "I need to take a look." "With all due respect, I don't consent to a search," Maya replied, staying seated. "I know my rights." Carter's lips curled into a sneer. "People like you always think you're smarter than the law," he said, his voice dropping low. "Get out now, or you'll regret it." Maya weighed her options. 15 years of special forces training told her compliance could de-escalate, but Carter's eyes, the unmasked contempt, stirred memories of being judged for her skin. She opened the door slowly, stepping out with hands visible. "I'm complying, officer," she said clearly, loud enough for the camera to catch. Carter motioned her to turn around, hands on the hood. He stood close, his breath brushing her ear. "Who do you think you are?" he whispered. "Out here, I decide who's right and who's wrong." Then, like a rehearsed act, he stumbled back, clutching his face. "She hit me," he shouted. "I need backup." Maya didn't move, her hands flat on the hood, eyes fixed on Carter's body camera. Another patrol car screeched up, and a second officer, badge reading Tom Harris, jogged over. "What happened?" Harris asked, his hand on his cuffs. "She assaulted me during a check," Carter yelled, pointing at his face, though no mark was visible. "Bet there's drugs in that car, too." "I didn't touch him," Maya said, her voice carrying for both officers and the camera. "The footage will show that." "Shut up," Carter snapped, shoving her against the hood harder than necessary. He rifled through her pockets, tossing her phone and wallet onto the front seat. Harris hesitated but snapped cuffs on her wrists. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer," Carter declared, his tone triumphant. "We're searching your car now." As the cuffs tightened, Maya didn't resist. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping Carter, Harris, and the third patrol car pulling up. Her mind wasn't on the injustice. It was on the camera's angle, Carter's words, and his biggest mistake, targeting the wrong woman. James Carter had no idea that Maya Thompson wasn't just a passerby. She was an elite Army Special Forces soldier who'd led missions through the world's deadliest conflicts. And today, he'd ignited a fight he couldn't win. In the cramped patrol car, Maya sat silently, her breathing even. She ignored Carter's smug grin as he drove and Harris's quiet fidgeting with her license. Through the window, she memorized the route to Crestwood's police station. A thought crossed her mind. Not the first time, but it'll be the last. She'd survived hostile territories and ambushes. A corrupt cop in her hometown? Just another obstacle. But she'd make him pay, not with fists, but with the truth. The station loomed ahead, its faded sign a relic of her childhood. Carter parked, yanking her door open. "Move it," he barked, but Maya stepped out with measured grace, her head high. Harris followed, clutching her documents, his eyes flickering with unease. She caught it, the first crack in their unity. As Carter led her inside, she noted the station's layout. 2 exits, a front desk, a flickering camera above. Her training kicked in, mapping the terrain like a battlefield. This wasn't just an arrest. It was the opening move in a game Carter didn't know he was playing. Maya Thompson, the woman he'd dismissed as people like you, was already planning her next step. By the time this was over, Crestwood would learn what happens when you underestimate a soldier who fights for justice. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of who you are? Share your thoughts below and follow along to see how Maya makes her accuser face the consequences. Maya Thompson's life had been forged in fire long before Officer James Carter's cuffs snapped around her wrists. Growing up in Crestwood's West Side, she'd navigated a world where opportunity was scarce. But her mother, Clara, a schoolteacher, instilled a fierce belief in discipline and dignity. At 17, Maya enlisted in the Army, trading small-town struggles for a chance to prove herself. Now, at 38, she was a major in the U.S. Army Special Forces, leading a covert unit through missions most couldn't imagine. Hostage rescues in deserts, infiltrations in jungles, operations so classified they never made the news. Her call sign, Vanguard, reflected her knack for staying one step ahead of chaos. Crestwood hadn't changed much in her absence. The courthouse still stood like a monument to fairness it rarely delivered. The police station, where her cousin once got roughed up for looking suspicious, remained a squat, gray building. The community center where Clara taught kids to read after school was crumbling, its paint peeling like the town's promises to its poorer half. Maya noticed the contrast as she drove in. Shiny new cafes in the East End, neglected streets in the West. It wasn't just geography. It was a divide of who got trusted and who got targeted. She'd come back on a rare 2-week leave after a 6-month deployment in a classified hotspot. Her mother's recent knee surgery was the official reason, but Maya craved the quiet of home, a chance to sit on Clara's porch and eat peach cobbler without scanning for threats. Her SUV, a practical choice for blending in, held little. A duffel bag, a locked case for her service medals, and a faded photo of her unit taped to the dash. She'd planned to slip into town unnoticed, just another visitor. But Officer Carter had other plans. In the patrol car after her arrest, Maya's mind wasn't on the cold metal cuffs or Carter's smug chuckle as he drove. It was on the patterns she'd already clocked. The way he'd staged the assault, his quick glance to ensure Harris saw it, the absence of visible bruising on his face. Her training had taught her to read people like maps, and Carter's map screamed arrogance and habit. This wasn't his first performance. The Crestwood police station smelled of stale coffee and bleach as Carter marched her inside. The front desk officer, a wiry man named Greg Sullivan, barely looked up from his paperwork. "What's this one?" he asked, scribbling. "Assaulted me during a stop," Carter said, shoving Maya forward. "Found something in her car, too. Probably drugs." "I didn't touch him," Maya said, her voice clear and deliberate, eyes flicking to the station's lone security camera. "And there's nothing illegal in my vehicle." Carter spun her around, his grip tight on her arm. "Keep talking, and you'll see how bad this gets," he hissed, low enough to avoid Sullivan's ears. Harris, trailing behind, shifted uncomfortably, clutching Maya's license like it might burn him. They led her to a holding area, a narrow room with chipped blue walls and a flickering bulb. Carter uncuffed her, but not before leaning in. "You think you're tough," he whispered. "I've broken plenty like you." Maya met his gaze, unflinching, noting the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Fear, not confidence, drove men like him. Harris handed her belongings to Sullivan, who tossed them into a plastic bin. "Phone call," Sullivan grunted, pointing to a wall-mounted phone. Most would call family or a lawyer, but Maya's fingers dialed a number etched in her memory. The line clicked after one ring. "Vanguard, report," a gruff voice answered. Colonel David Reed, her commanding officer. "Major Thompson, delayed in Crestwood," Maya said, her tone clipped and professional. "Situation Bravo, civilian interference. Request, standby." "Understood," Reed replied. "Coordinates?" "Local station, main precinct," she said, aware of Sullivan's bored glance. To him, it sounded like a routine chat. To Reed, it was a code. Trouble, non-lethal, potential escalation. "Support on alert," Reed said. "Check in at 2100 hours." "Copy," Maya said, hanging up. She turned to find Carter watching her, his smirk faltering. "Who was that?" he asked, stepping closer. "Someone who'll ask questions if I'm not home tonight," Maya replied, her voice steady. Carter scoffed but didn't press, a flicker of unease crossing his face. They moved her to booking, where Sullivan snapped her photo and took fingerprints. "Smile, sweetheart," he said, chuckling. Maya's expression didn't change, her eyes scanning the room. 2 officers at desks, a third on break, a camera with a partial blind spot near the corner. Her mind cataloged it all, just as she'd done in hostile compounds overseas. Harris lingered nearby, flipping through her license. "Says you're military," he muttered, almost to himself. "Army." "Something like that," Maya said, her tone neutral. She didn't mention the green beret patch in her duffel or the silver star buried in her case. Let them underestimate her. It was their first mistake. Carter reappeared, holding a small plastic bag with white pills. "Look what we found in your car," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Illegal prescription meds. Explains why you got violent." Maya's pulse stayed even. Her car was spotless. She'd checked it herself before driving. Those pills were planted, and Carter's smug grin confirmed it. "That's not mine," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Your camera footage will show you were alone with my vehicle." His grin faded for a split second. "We'll see about that," he snapped, motioning to Harris. "Get her to a cell." As Harris led her away, Maya caught his glance, less certain than Carter's, almost apologetic. She filed it away. Allies could come from unexpected places, and Carter's overconfidence was already cracking his partner's trust. In the cell, a concrete box with a thin cot, Maya sat cross-legged, her breathing slow. She wasn't thinking about the charges or Carter's lies. She was thinking about the next move, who Carter answered to, how deep Crestwood's corruption ran, and the moment she'd turn this ambush into her victory. James Carter thought he'd trapped a nobody. He was about to learn what happens when you corner a soldier trained to dismantle empires. Have you ever faced someone who misjudged your strength? The Crestwood police station's holding cell was a stark cube of concrete and steel, its air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. Maya Thompson sat on the cot, her posture relaxed but alert, as if she were waiting for a briefing rather than facing charges of assault and drug possession. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting shadows that danced across the walls. She'd been here an hour, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead, mapping the terrain of her predicament like a battlefield. Officer James Carter had played his hand boldly, staging an assault, planting pills in her SUV, and parading her through the station like a trophy. But boldness wasn't the same as precision, and Maya had spotted his errors. The overacted stagger when he claimed she'd hit him, the pills conveniently found after he'd been alone with her car, the flicker of doubt in Officer Tom Harris's eyes. Carter thought he was in control, but every lie was a thread Maya could pull to unravel him. The station itself was a relic of Crestwood's past, its faded walls unchanged since Maya was a teenager sneaking peeks at her cousin's hearings. She'd learned early that justice here depended on who you were or who you weren't. Now, as an Army Special Forces major, she saw it with new clarity. 2 officers at the front desk, one on break, a security camera with a 30-degree blind spot near the water cooler. Her eyes traced the room through the cell's bars, noting the shift change schedule pinned to a bulletin board. Information was her weapon, and she was collecting it. Carter strutted back into the booking area, his voice carrying a false bravado. "Got a real fighter here," he announced to the desk sergeant, a grizzled man named Frank Miller. "Tried to take me out during a routine stop. Had to wrestle her down." Maya didn't react, her face a mask of calm. She noted Miller's quick glance at her, less convinced than Carter expected. "She hit you?" Miller asked, his tone flat, eyeing Carter's unmarked face. "Right in the jaw," Carter lied, rubbing his cheek for effect. "Lucky I've got reflexes. Found drugs too, pills stashed in her console." Miller grunted, scribbling in a logbook. "Doesn't look like a brawler," he muttered, but he didn't press further. Maya caught the exchange, filing it away. Miller wasn't Carter's ally, just a cog in the machine, too tired to question the routine. Harris hovered near the desk, clutching Maya's license like a lifeline. He hadn't spoken since they'd arrived, but his silence spoke volumes. "Says she's Army," he said finally, almost to himself, glancing at Maya through the bars. "Plenty of people claim that," Carter scoffed, snatching the license. "Probably some desk clerk spinning stories." He tossed it onto the desk, where it slid toward a coffee-stained mug. Maya's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. Let them think she was a nobody. It made her next move easier. She stood, stretching her arms to mask her study of the camera's angle. "Can I make my call now?" she asked, her voice steady. Miller waved at the wall phone. "Make it quick," he said, barely looking up. Maya dialed a number she could recite in her sleep. It rang once, before Colonel David Reed's voice answered, crisp and commanding. "Vanguard, status. Major Thompson, detained in Crestwood," Maya said, keeping her tone conversational for Miller's ears. "Situation Bravo. Local interference. Request monitoring." Location confirmed, Reed replied, catching her code. Assets on standby. Report at 2200. Understood, Maya said. Hanging up, she returned to the cot, aware of Carter's stare from across the room. He'd heard the call but missed its meaning, his smirk betraying his confidence. That arrogance was his weakness, and Maya would exploit it. Harris approached the cell, his steps hesitant. You really? Military? He asked, his voice low enough to avoid Carter's ears. Check my service record, Maya said, meeting his gaze. It's public enough. She didn't mention the classified parts, the missions in hostile territories, the lives she'd saved, the scars hidden under her jacket. Harris nodded, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his unease. Before he could say more, Carter stormed over, holding the plastic bag of pills. Look at this haul, he said, dangling it for Miller to see. Explains why she was so jumpy, high as a kite. My car was clean, Maya said, her voice cutting through his bluster. You were alone with it for 10 minutes. Chain of custody's broken. Carter's eyes narrowed, but he recovered quickly. Keep dreaming, he said, tossing the bag onto the desk. By tomorrow, you'll be begging for a deal. Miller sighed, standing to process the evidence. Get her to interrogation, he told Harris. Let's wrap this up. The interrogation room was a step up from the cell. Less grime, same bad lighting. Harris sat across from Maya, a notepad untouched in front of him, while Carter paced like a caged animal. Let's make this simple, Carter said, leaning over the table. Admit you swung at me, and maybe we drop the drug charge. Maya folded her hands, her posture perfect. I didn't touch you, she said. Your camera will prove it. Carter laughed, but it was forced. Cameras glitch sometimes, he said, his eyes darting to Harris. Right, Tom? Harris shifted, his pen tapping the pad. Yeah, he mumbled, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya caught it. The wedge between them was growing. They left her there for an hour, standard procedure to wear down suspects. But Maya wasn't most suspects. She used the time to think, her mind sifting through Carter's behavior, Harris's doubt, Miller's indifference. This wasn't just one bad cop. It was a system that let him thrive. She'd seen it before, in Crestwood's West Side, where complaints vanished and arrests piled up. Carter wasn't working alone, and she'd find out who pulled his strings. When Harris returned alone, he carried a cup of water. Thought you might need this, he said, setting it down. His eyes lingered on her, searching for something, guilt, fear, anything but the calm he found. Thanks, Maya said, taking a sip. You've been here long? 6 months, Harris said, glancing at the door. Transferred from Richmond. First time seeing Carter pull this? She asked, her tone casual but probing. Harris froze, then shrugged. He's got his methods, he said, but his jaw tightened. Maya nodded, letting it go. She'd planted the seed. Doubt would do the rest. Back in the cell, Maya lay on the cot, eyes tracing the ceiling cracks. Carter thought he'd caged her, but cages were just obstacles, and she'd broken through worse. By morning, she'd have a plan, and James Carter would learn what it meant to cross a soldier who never backed down. Would you stay calm like Maya, or confront a false accuser head-on? Share your thoughts below and see what she does next. The Crestwood County Courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, its high ceilings echoing with the murmurs of clerks and lawyers. Maya Thompson sat at the defense table in courtroom 2, her wrists free but her resolve cuffed to a purpose. She wore the same clothes from yesterday, a black jacket and jeans, cleaned by her mother, Clara, who'd posted her $2,000 bail hours after the arrest. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, but Maya's focus was razor sharp, her eyes scanning the room like a soldier assessing a stronghold. The preliminary hearing for State versus Maya Thompson was meant to be routine, a formality to lock in charges of assaulting an officer and drug possession. Officer James Carter sat across the room, his uniform crisp, his face sporting a faint redness that looked more like makeup than a bruise. He caught Maya's gaze and smirked, confident in his script. He'd done this before. She could see it in his ease, the way he nodded to the prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Ellen Pierce. But Maya wasn't like his other targets. She was a special forces major who'd stared down warlords and ambushes, and today, she'd start dismantling his game. Her public defender, Robert Ellis, slouched beside her, his tie loose and his briefcase spilling papers. He'd met her an hour ago, skimming her file with the enthusiasm of someone clocking out early. "Look, Ms. Thompson," he'd whispered before the hearing, "plead to resisting arrest, and they'll drop the big stuff. 6 months probation, clean slate." "I didn't do anything," Maya had replied, her voice low but firm. "I'm not pleading to lies." Ellis had sighed, muttering about tough cases, but Maya wasn't listening. She was watching the gallery, mostly locals, a few reporters, and Clara, her mother, sitting in the second row, her face tight with worry but her eyes fierce with pride. Maya gave her a small nod, a silent promise. "I've got this." Judge Henry Larson, a gray-haired man with 25 years on the bench, called the room to order. His voice was gravelly, his demeanor no nonsense. "State, present your case," he said, adjusting his glasses. Ellen Pierce stood, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Your Honor, the defendant, Maya Thompson, assaulted Officer James Carter during a lawful traffic stop on April 14, 2025. She struck him in the face, causing injury, and was found in possession of illegal prescription drugs. The state requests charges be bound over for trial and bail set at $25,000. Larson glanced at Maya, his expression unreadable. "Defense, response." Ellis cleared his throat, fumbling with notes. "We, request a not guilty plea and ask for reasonable bail, Your Honor. My client has no priors." "Very well," Larson said. "State, call your witness." Carter took the stand, swearing in with a practiced solemnity. Pierce led him through his story, each word polished like a rehearsed speech. "I stopped Ms. Thompson for running a stop sign on Main Street," he said, his voice steady. "When I approached, she was uncooperative, refusing to exit her vehicle. I smelled something suspicious, so I asked her to step out. That's when she lashed out, hitting me with what felt like a trained strike, maybe some kind of martial arts move." Maya's face remained still, but her mind cataloged every lie. Carter's injury was a faint mark, inconsistent with the force he described. She noted Pierce's nod, encouraging him, and Ellis's lack of notes, already disengaged. "Did you seek medical attention, Officer Carter?" Pierce asked, her tone leading. "No, ma'am," Carter said, touching his cheek. "I've taken worse in training. Just did my job to subdue her." "And the drugs?" Pierce pressed. "Found a bag of pills in her console during a search," Carter said. "Looked like oxycodone, no prescription." Pierce turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Larson looked at Ellis. "Cross-examination?" Ellis stood, adjusting his tie. "Officer Carter, was the defendant's vehicle in plain view when you found these pills?" "Yes," Carter said smoothly. "Right there in the open." "No further questions," Ellis said, sitting down with a shrug. Maya leaned toward him, her voice a whisper. "Ask about the body camera." Ellis waved her off. "It's fine. he muttered. We'll get to that later. Frustration flickered in Maya's chest, but she buried it. She'd learned long ago that battles weren't won by outbursts. She glanced at Clara, whose hands were clasped tightly, and drew strength from her mother's silent faith. Larson turned to Maya. Ms. Thompson, you've entered a not guilty plea. Anything to add before I set bail? This was her moment. Maya stood, her posture straight as if addressing a commanding officer. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and resonant. I am Major Maya Thompson, United States Army, currently on leave after 15 years of service. I have no criminal record. The charges against me are false, as Officer Carter's body camera will prove. I respectfully request you allow my commanding officer to verify my status. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Carter's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Pierce froze mid-note, her pen hovering. Even Ellis looked up, startled. Clara's eyes shone with pride, her lips curving slightly. Larson leaned forward, peering over his glasses. Army, you say? Current rank? Major, Your Honor, Maya replied. Special Forces, 7th Group. The gallery buzzed louder. A reporter scribbled furiously, sensing a story. Carter shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously. He hadn't expected this. Not a decorated officer, not someone who could command attention with 2 words. Your assignment? Larson asked, his tone curious but cautious. I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics in open court, Maya said. But my commander, Colonel David Reed, can confirm my record. Larson nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on her. Noted, bail is set at $5,000. Charges are bound over pending further evidence. Next case. Pierce jumped up. Your Honor, the state object's $25,000 is more appropriate given the severity. Overruled, Larson said sharply, banging his gavel. Court's adjourned. As the room emptied, Carter glared at Maya, his confidence shaken. She met his gaze unflinching, her expression saying what words didn't. You miscalculated. Clara rushed forward, hugging her tightly. I knew you'd stand tall, she whispered. Outside, Ellis scratched his head. That was risky. Bringing up the military stuff, he said. Might not help. It already has, Maya said, her voice quiet but certain. She'd played her first card, not her full hand, but enough to change the game. Carter thought he'd cornered a nobody, but he'd just stepped into a fight with a soldier who never lost. Would you speak up like Maya in court, or play it safe? Share your thoughts below, and see how her plan unfolds. Maya Thompson stepped out of the Crestwood County Courthouse into a humid April evening, the weight of her mother's embrace still lingering. Clara had driven her home after posting bail, her quiet strength a reminder of why Maya fought, not just for herself, but for everyone Crestwood's West Side had let down. The charges against her, assaulting Officer James Carter and drug possession, hung like a storm cloud, but Maya wasn't a victim waiting for rescue. She was a Special Forces major, trained to turn ambushes into opportunities, and Carter had just handed her the battlefield. Back at Clara's modest bungalow, Maya sat at the kitchen table, a laptop open and a notepad filling with precise annotations. Her mother brewed tea, the clink of porcelain a soft counterpoint to Maya's focus. She'd spent 15 years mastering intelligence analysis, piecing together fragments from informants, drones, and intercepts to dismantle threats. Now, those skills targeted Carter. His lies were sloppy. No bruise matched his assault claim. The pills appeared too conveniently, and his partner, Tom Harris, hadn't fully bought the story. Carter wasn't just a rogue cop, he was part of something bigger, and Maya would find it. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Colonel David Reed. Assets mobilized. Intel Incoming by 0700. Maya nodded to herself. Reed trusted her instincts, and she'd signaled enough for him to pull strings. She opened a file on her laptop, a public database of Crestwood police records. Carter's name appeared in 14 arrests over 2 years, all minorities, all traffic stops escalating to searches, most ending in plea deals for resisting or minor drug charges. The pattern screamed fabrication, but she needed proof. A knock at the door broke her focus. Clara answered, revealing Harris, out of uniform, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Can I talk to her?" he asked, his voice low. Clara glanced at Maya, who nodded. Harris sat across from her, his eyes darting to the notepad. "I shouldn't be here," he started, rubbing his neck. "But what happened yesterday, it's not sitting right." Maya leaned back, her expression neutral. "What's not sitting right, Officer Harris?" He hesitated, then spoke. Carter's story. The way he acted, like he knew how it'd play out. "I saw your hands on the hood. You didn't move." She studied him, reading the conflict in his hunched shoulders. "You've seen him do this before," she said, not a question. Harris swallowed. "Last month, a kid from the west side. Carter said he found weed in his car. Kid swore it wasn't his, but he took a plea. Carter got a commendation. He slid a USB drive across the table. This has his last 6 months of reports. I copied them before they got archived." Maya took the drive, her face unreadable. "Why give this to me?" "Because I didn't sign up to frame people," Harris said, his voice cracking. "I just don't know how deep this goes." "Deep enough," Maya said, pocketing the drive. "You did the right thing." As Harris left, Clara set a mug of tea beside Maya. "You sure about him?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "He's a start," Maya said, plugging in the drive. The files confirmed her suspicions. Carter's reports used identical phrasing, erratic behavior, suspicious odor, across cases, with evidence logs signed by Sergeant Frank Miller. Miller wasn't just a bystander. He was complicit. By midnight, Maya's kitchen table resembled a command center, timelines of Carter's arrests, notes on Miller's signatures, and a map linking incidents to Crestwood's west side. One name surfaced in related records: Richard Vance, a local businessman owning clubs in the East End, rumored to bankroll police fundraisers. 3 of Carter's drug busts, tied to Vance's rivals, suggesting a payoff scheme. Maya's pulse quickened. This was the thread she'd pull. Her phone chimed at 0700, a secure email from Reed. Attached were federal records. Carter's bank account showed unexplained deposits, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, timed with his arrests. A second file flagged Vance for suspected laundering through his clubs. Reed's note was brief. "Jag en route. Set your trap." Maya smiled faintly. The army didn't abandon its own, and Colonel Reed was sending cavalry. She drove to a budget motel on Crestwood's outskirts, booking a room under a false name. The clerk barely glanced at her ID, perfect for her plan. Inside, she rigged the room with military-grade motion sensors and a hidden camera, synced to her laptop. If Carter took the bait, he'd expose himself. She left a decoy, a cheap burner phone with a fake text to "Meet at Motel" in her SUV, which was now an impound. Carter's ego would do the rest. That afternoon, outside the courthouse for a bail check-in, Carter approached her, his face a mask of false concern. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, crowding her space. "Drop the tough act, and maybe I don't press for jail time." Maya stood her ground, her voice calm. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" His eyes flashed with anger. "I've been here 12 years, he hissed. "I know judges, prosecutors, everybody. You're just another loudmouth who'll fold. He leaned closer, unaware her jacket's lapel held a tiny recorder. Keep pushing, and that pretty SUV of yours might not survive impound. Things get lost, you know. Thanks for the advice, Maya said, her tone even. She walked away, feeling the recorder's weight like a loaded weapon. Carter's threats were gold, every word a nail in his coffin. That night, at the motel, Maya waited in a rented car across the lot, her laptop open. At 01:30, a familiar unmarked sedan pulled in. Carter. He moved to her room, tools glinting in his hand as he picked the lock. The sensors pinged her screen, and the camera streamed live. Carter sweeping the empty room, finding nothing but a note she'd left. Wrong move, officer. His face twisted in fury, then panic, as red and blue lights flooded the lot. Not Crestwood police, but federal agents, tipped off by Reed. Carter froze as agents surrounded him, badges flashing. James Carter, you're under investigation for unauthorized entry and evidence tampering, one announced, cuffing him. Maya watched from her car, her expression unreadable. She hadn't just caught him, she'd baited him into a trap he'd never escape. Have you ever outsmarted someone who underestimated you? Share your story below and see how Maya's trap pays off. The Crestwood County Courthouse buzzed with an electric tension as Courtroom 2 filled for the final hearing of State versus Maya Thompson. Reporters packed the gallery, their notebooks open, drawn by whispers of a military officer facing down a local cop. Maya sat at the defense table, her black blazer pressed, her posture as steady as a soldier awaiting orders. Her mother, Clara, sat in the front row, her hands clasped, but her eyes alight with hope. Across the room, Officer James Carter adjusted his uniform, his confidence fraying at the edges. He'd walked into Maya's trap at the motel 2 nights ago, and now, the consequences were closing in. Judge Henry Larson took the bench, his stern gaze sweeping the room. At 68, he'd seen every kind of case, but the air today felt different, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Let's proceed, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. State, call your first witness. Prosecutor Ellen Pierce stood, her expression tightly controlled. She'd spent the morning reviewing troubling reports, dash cam discrepancies, a federal inquiry into Carter, but her job was to win. The state calls Officer James Carter, she said. Carter took the stand, his oath delivered with a practiced calm that didn't reach his eyes. Pierce led him through his story, each question a lifeline to his narrative. On April 14th, I stopped Ms. Thompson for a traffic violation, he said, his voice steady. She refused to comply, became aggressive, and struck me in the face. During a lawful search, I found illegal prescription drugs in her vehicle. Maya watched him, her face impassive, but her mind dissecting every word. Carter's lie was polished, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting slightly when he mentioned the strike. She glanced at her new counsel, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett, a judge advocate general officer sent by Colonel Reed. Unlike the apathetic public defender, Robert Ellis, Sarah sat poised, her briefcase open to a stack of evidence that could bury Carter. No further questions, Pierce said, returning to her seat. Judge Larson turned to the defense. Your witness. Sarah rose, her presence commanding the room. She'd arrived yesterday, her credentials forcing Ellis to step aside. Your Honor, she began, the defense wishes to clarify Major Thompson's status. She is not, as Officer Carter implied, a civilian troublemaker. She is a decorated Special Forces officer with the 7th Group, recipient of the Silver Star, and 2 Bronze Stars for valor. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Clara's lips curved in pride. Carter's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Pierce for rescue. Larson leaned forward, intrigued. Noted, he said. Proceed with your cross-examination. Sarah approached Carter, her voice calm but surgical. Officer Carter, you claim Major Thompson struck you with force. Can you describe the injury? Carter touched his cheek, where a faint mark lingered. Bruised my jaw, he said. Hurt for days. Sarah nodded, signaling a technician. Let's examine Defense Exhibit 1, your body camera footage from the stop. A screen lit up, showing the moment in crisp detail. Maya's hands flat on the SUV's hood, unmoving, as Carter stumbled back, clutching his face. Can you explain how Major Thompson struck you without lifting her hands? Carter shifted, sweat beading on his brow. The angle's bad, he stammered. Doesn't show everything. Perhaps this will, Sarah said, introducing a second video from a nearby gas station's camera. It captured the same moment from the side. Maya still, Carter's theatrical fall unprompted. The gallery murmured, reporters scribbling faster. Pierce stood. Objection, Your Honor. Chain of custody for this video hasn't been overruled, Larson said, his eyes fixed on the screen. Continue, Colonel Bennett. Sarah turned to Carter. Let's discuss the drugs. You testified they were in plain view, yet your report states you found them after a 10-minute search, alone, while Major Thompson was detained. Why the delay? Carter's voice wavered. I had to be thorough. Sarah held up a report. This is the evidence log, signed by Sergeant Frank Miller. The pills were never tested for fingerprints. Why not? They were clearly hers, Carter snapped, his cool slipping. I followed procedure. Sarah's next move was devastating. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Lisa Grant, forensic analyst. Grant, a composed woman in her 50s, took the stand. Dr. Grant, you reviewed Officer Carter's alleged injury. Your findings? The mark on his face shows no tissue damage consistent with a strike, Grant said, pointing to a photo. The pattern suggests cosmetic application, not trauma. Carter's face reddened, not from bruising, but panic. Sarah wasn't done. We also have Officer Tom Harris's statement, she said, nodding to Harris in the gallery. He'd agreed to testify after handing Maya the USB drive, his conscience outweighing his fear. Officer Harris, did you witness Major Thompson strike Officer Carter? Harris stood, his voice steady. No, ma'am. Her hands never left the vehicle. I later saw Carter alone with her car before he reported finding drugs. The courtroom buzzed. Pierce scribbled furiously, sensing the case unraveling. Carter gripped the stand, his eyes wild. He's lying, he shouted. They're all against me. Order, Larson barked, banging his gavel. Officer Carter, control yourself. Sarah pressed forward, her voice relentless. Your Honor, we submit Major Thompson's service record. She has led 28 high-risk missions, mastered hand-to-hand combat, and trained in evasion tactics. If she'd struck you, Officer Carter, you wouldn't be standing here with a smudge. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Clara covered a smile. Carter's face drained of color, realizing too late who he'd targeted. Not a random driver, but a warrior, whose discipline outmatched his deceit. Your Honor, Sarah concluded. The defense submits motel surveillance from April 16th, showing Officer Carter breaking into a room to tamper with evidence, captured by federal agents. The footage played, Carter picking the lock, cursing as he found Maya's note. Gasps filled the room. Larson's face darkened. Officer Carter, do you wish to amend your testimony? Carter's pride overrode sense. I stand by it, he growled, committing to his lies. Larson removed his glasses, his voice heavy. Based on the evidence, body camera discrepancies, forensic findings, and credible testimony, I find no basis for these charges. The case against Major Thompson is dismissed with prejudice. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Furr. I'm referring Officer Carter to the district attorney for investigation into perjury and evidence tampering. Carter exploded. This is a setup, he shouted, rising. You're letting her walk because she's military, aren't you? People like her, always. Enough, Larson snapped. You're in contempt, Officer Carter. Bailiff, remove him. As Carter was led away, still ranting, 2 federal agents stood, badges gleaming. James Carter, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy, one said, cuffing him. The courtroom erupted in whispers, reporters racing for the doors. Maya stood, her expression calm but her eyes alive with resolve. Clara rushed to her, tears streaming. You did it, she whispered, hugging her daughter. Sarah leaned in, her voice low. You played it perfectly, Major. Not over yet, Maya said, glancing at Carter's retreating figure. She'd won this battle, but the war, for Crestwood's West Side, for truth, was just beginning. How would you feel watching a liar like Carter fall? Share your thoughts below and see what Maya does next. The dust settled slowly in Crestwood, Virginia, after the courtroom storm that freed Maya Thompson and cuffed Officer James Carter. 3 days after the charges against her were dismissed, Maya stood on the porch of her mother's bungalow, the morning air cool against her skin. Clara hummed inside, frying bacon for breakfast, the sound a quiet anchor to a town forever changed. Maya's victory wasn't just personal. It had cracked open Crestwood's hidden wounds, exposing corruption and sparking a reckoning she'd never expected. The fallout came fast. Federal agents, tipped by Colonel David Reed's intel and Maya's motel trap, widened their probe into Crestwood's police department. Sergeant Frank Miller, Carter's enabling superior, struck a deal to testify, revealing a decade of doctored evidence logs and hushed complaints. Richard Vance, the businessman linked to Carter's payoffs, faced charges for money laundering through his East End clubs. The local paper ran headlines daily. Corruption scandal rocks Crestwood. Officer arrested in frame-up plot. Reporters called Maya for quotes, but she declined, letting the truth speak for itself. Crestwood's West Side felt the shift most. The community center, where Clara had taught reading classes, stood on the brink of closure before the scandal broke. Now, donations poured in, some from locals inspired by Maya's stand, others from businesses eager to distance themselves from Vance's taint. Volunteers repainted its walls, and kids swarmed new art programs, their laughter echoing where silence once reigned. Maya visited one afternoon, watching a girl sketch a sunrise. Looks like hope, Maya said, and the girl grinned, unaware she'd met a hero. Officer Tom Harris became an unlikely ally in the aftermath. His testimony against Carter, born from the USB drive he'd given Maya, marked him as a pariah among some colleagues, but a beacon to others. He met Maya at the community center a week after the hearing, his badge polished, but his eyes heavy. I almost looked the other way, he admitted, kicking at the gravel. What made you keep fighting? Maya leaned against a bench, her voice steady. I learned early that running from a fight just makes it chase you. You stood up, Tom. That's harder than pulling a trigger. Harris nodded, a faint smile breaking through. They're adding body cams that can't be turned off, he said. New review board too, with West Side folks on it. Small steps, but real. Small steps move mountains, Maya said, clapping his shoulder. She saw in him what she'd seen in recruits, a spark of purpose, ready to grow if nurtured. Carter's fate was less hopeful, but no less deserved. Stripped of his badge, he pleaded guilty to evidence tampering and civil rights violations, avoiding trial but not accountability. A court-ordered program for disgraced officers awaited him, forcing him to face the biases that had twisted his career. Sitting in a sterile classroom, he stared at a workbook titled Restoring Integrity. The irony bitter. His fall wasn't redemption, not yet, but a chance to confront what he'd become. A possibility Maya hadn't expected but didn't begrudge. Her own path took her back to the army, but not before a quiet ceremony at Fort Bragg. Colonel Reed pinned a meritorious service medal to her uniform, his voice booming across the hall. Major Thompson exemplified courage beyond the battlefield, he said, upholding justice in the face of deceit. Her unit cheered, their faces a mosaic of trust, earned through years of shared danger. Maya saluted, her chest tight, not from pride, but from knowing her fight had honored them too. Before leaving Crestwood, Maya visited her father's grave, a simple stone in the West Side Cemetery. Samuel Thompson, a mechanic who died when she was 12, had faced his own battles, unpaid tickets escalating to jail time, a system that saw his skin before his heart. She knelt, placing a pebble on the marker, a ritual from her childhood. "They didn't break me, Dad," she whispered, "and they're breaking less now." Clara drove her to the airport, the SUV's radio playing soft jazz. "You changed this place, you know," Clara said, her voice thick. "Kids, look up now, not down." "Didn't do it alone," Maya said, squeezing her mother's hand. "You taught me to stand tall." As her plane climbed into the sky, Maya gazed at Crestwood shrinking below, a patchwork of old scars and new growth. Her leave was over, her next mission classified, likely perilous. She'd face it as always, eyes open, mind sharp, heart steady. But she carried something new, a certainty that her hometown, flawed as it was, had taken a step toward fairness. For a soldier like Maya Thompson, that was a victory worth fighting for. Back in Crestwood, the community center hosted its first open house since the scandal. Clara led a reading circle, her voice warm as kids leaned in, captivated by stories of heroes. Across town, Harris patrolled the west side, waving to a shopkeeper who'd once crossed the street to avoid him. At the courthouse, Judge Larson reviewed a proposal for bias training, his pen circling mandatory. And in a quiet office, a federal agent sifted through Vance's files, tracing money trails to other towns, other Carters. Maya's fight hadn't erased Crestwood's divides, but it had cracked them open, letting light seep through. The West Side breathed easier, its people a little bolder, its future a little brighter. For every child sketching at the center, every officer rethinking their badge, her shadow lingered, not as a soldier, but as a spark of change. As her plane banked toward the horizon, Maya closed her eyes, the hum of engines a familiar lullaby. She'd return to Crestwood someday, to Clara's porch and peach cobbler. Until then, she'd carry its lessons into battles unseen. A warrior who'd proven that truth, wielded right, could topple even the stubbornest lies. What legacy would you want to leave in your hometown? Share your thoughts below and tell us how Maya's story inspired you.